many people are focused on at this moment, and that is Hillary Clinton. Fritz, you are perhaps the foremost expert on Illuminati programming and MK Ultra mind control. Obviously, something is very awry with Hillary's mental state, as well perhaps with her health, her physical condition in her body, but also her mental capacity. There's lots of videos now all over the internet of Hillary Clinton obviously having these coughing fits, but as well as zoning out. And there's this, she has a group of handlers, particularly the big black guy that follows her around and kind of whispers in her ear and keeps her going. And some people have suggested he's carrying around with him some kind of an injecting pen to inject her with a stimulant of some sort. And it's apparent to everybody that Hillary Clinton is deteriorating before our eyes. Obviously, she's a massive globalist, and she is going to further the agenda of the Illuminati, the agenda of the Luciferian elite. So what is your take on what's happening with Hillary Clinton? Are we looking at, in your opinion, just a physical breakdown of her body, or are we also looking at a mental breakdown, maybe even related to MK Ultra programming or something of that nature?
Wow. Very appropriate question for this point in time. I'm sure a lot of people are interested. As I am answering it, I'm trying to gather my thoughts, not because I don't have something to say, but because I have so much to say. It's like, where do you begin? First, yes, obviously she has health problems, but people need to understand this is the oldest candidate that's ever run for president. And if you're her age, you know, a lot of people that run for president are like maybe in their 50s or something. This woman is old, so of course she's going to have health problems. And she's been involved with MK Ultra, and so that suggests that she does have either she's a programmed multiple, which I've never seen any direct evidence that she is, but she's definitely, if she's functioning at the level that she is, which she's a low-level programmer and handler, she's definitely messed up mentally. So we're looking at someone who's got mental problems as well as health problems. And what happened yesterday, I was fortunate that somebody that was watching things picked up on it immediately. There was the video shot of her leaning against a concrete pillar, and then she's got her Arab handler to one side. Or this lady's, Abedin's, a part of the Saudi royal family, a princess in the Saudi royal family, which, if you know Islam, it's all these feminists that are for Hillary, and yet she's buddies with Saudi Arabia and Islam. In fact, if you look at her book, I'm sure it was ghost written, but she admits in her book that's been selling that the U.S. created ISIS. So, I mean, we're looking at somebody who has no moral integrity at all and has lived a life of debauchery. The Secret Service agents that were in the White House when Bill and Hillary were in the White House talked about how they had all these debauched parties constantly at the White House. So she's lived a debauched life. She's old. So it's no surprise that she has health problems. Some doctors have come on, as you know, and said she has the symptoms of Parkinson's disease. What we saw yesterday was she's standing there on this, leaned up against this concrete pillar. She has an episode where she just loses control of her body, they grab her under the arms. They don't grab her quite strong enough because they're thinking that, when they pick her up from the pillar, that she's going to support herself a little bit, but she doesn't. She starts to collapse. They grab her better and toss her into the vehicle, and she loses one of her shoes as they drag her and throw her in. So, the reports are that the lady has a hard time standing more than 10 to 15 minutes. I'm not surprised. She's, considering everything.
Yeah, she's 68 years old. And it's basically like your grandmother running for the president to begin with. Now, it's interesting to note that Trump is 70. And
but he hasn't lived a debauched life either.
Exactly. That's what I was going to say. You compare him to her. They both lived a privileged life. Both of them have been exceedingly pampered their entire lives. I would say especially Hillary Clinton, because she's been served hand and foot ever since she was the First Lady of Arkansas. So we know that in the 90s, there are certain individuals who are coming out and were specifically naming Hillary Clinton as somebody that was at least obtaining the services of mind-controlled MKUltra monarch slaves. Probably most famously, it was Kathy O'Brien. I don't know what you think of Kathy O'Brien or what you think of her testimony, but she was coming out a lot in the 90s and still is talking to this day in great detail concerning Hillary Clinton. So when you say a debauched lifestyle, we might be dealing with a lifestyle that it probably could reach levels that are absolutely unbelievable to the average American. We know that Hillary Clinton was involved in some level with some kind of a Wiccan church or a witch's church in California. I feel like she is somewhat of a virus vector at this point. That her job may in fact be to deliver her VP candidate, Tim Kaine, to deliver him into the White House, to bring him, to carry him. Is she functioning as a carrier? Are they using Hillary Clinton, and whether it be the CIA or the Illuminati or whatever group you want to name, are they using her to carry, to convey Tim Kaine into the Oval Office? And the reason why I wonder this is because Tim Kaine is a strange man. If you look at his past, he's Jesuit trained. Now, he's not a Jesuit himself, as far as I know, but he is Jesuit trained, and he spent a lot of time with the Jesuits in Honduras. And he refers to himself as a Pope Francis Catholic, and he is, for all intents and purposes, he seems to be very loyal to the Vatican. And as a Catholic, and as specifically as a Jesuit-trained Catholic, I know that Tim Kaine subscribes to liberation theology, which was devised by the Jesuits, especially the Jesuits in South America. It actually came from a particular Jesuit in Peru. But we may be looking at a Jesuit coup in the United States at the White House level, the presidential level, to insert somebody into the White House that will basically be a yes man for Pope Francis.
That's a distinct possibility. What I'm going to share right now comes from years of working with people that were trying to get out of the Illuminati, plus people that interacted with me that were in the Illuminati, plus working with people that had been CIA that wanted some of this one guy that he was a pilot that was bringing in the cocaine for the CIA in Arkansas. He ended up, because he was a whistleblower, going to prison. But I've spoke with a lot of people like this, and so there's so much here to say. Let me just instead of directly, let me build a few things here for those that aren't familiar with what I put out, is that people that were in the Illuminati and trying to escape from it, across the board, they all said Hillary was a member of the Illuminati. She was at least a grand dame, and she's way up in the hierarchy. She's She's near the top of the women's branch of hierarchy. So you've got her into high-level witchcraft. Like you said, Bill has openly, publicly talked about her going to a Wicca coven in California. And there's a lot of witches that are associated with her campaign, a lot of Illuminati members too. So you've got that. But also, Bill and her have worked hand in glove with the CIA. So when you say when you mention the CIA, we've got that aspect, is she's definitely their candidate. But you have to understand CIA, FBI are heavily infiltrated and work close with the Illuminati too. But the CIA also works close with the Jesuits. So we've got all of these groups, secretive groups, you might say, that are really cults. The CIA is basically a cult. The Jesuits are like a cult to themselves, within a cult within the Catholic Church, a law to themselves. So you got all of these. So that's why at a certain point I say evil almost defies labels. But she's working with and for all of these groups. And then you talk about Cain, just the name sends shivers up me, Raising Cain.
Exactly.
That was the name of one of my articles. But the guy, he's not your standard Catholic. He says, well, privately I'm against abortion, but publicly I'm for abortion. And the guy's gay. He publicly told his wife, if you want to have a sexual life, you need to go out and have sex with somebody else. He acts at them in his interviews. So he's not your standard Bible-believing Catholic, but he's your typical Luciferian, have the label Catholic.
Well, he is more aligned with the Jesuits than he is with traditional Catholicism, and that's my point. The man is Jesuit trained. He reflects the Jesuit credo. The Jesuits had a breaking with the Catholic Church with the supremacy of the Holy See in the 60s. And they basically became a rogue organization that at this point it was uncontrollable for a long time, actually even defying the Pope, especially Pope John Paul II. But now what do we have at the Vatican? We have a Jesuit coup. We have a Jesuit installed as the Pope. So the thing that people need to understand is that the Jesuit agenda, which is the agenda of the Illuminati, is in full force at the Vatican. There's no question about it. I mean, they're pushing they're pushing globalism. They're pushing even the carbon taxes and global warming. I mean, it is an assault coming out of the Vatican, and the United States is the primary force standing against the plans of the New World Order. And what better way to do the final dismantling of the United States in terms of the roadblock of the United States than to insert a Jesuit agent into the White House who will take orders from Pope Francis, will work hand in hand with Pope Francis, and thereby working for the agenda of the ruling elite. That, by the way, for everything that I've seen, indicates that power, Illuminati power, the Luciferian power, seems to be consolidated at the Vatican. So I think that what we're looking at here, more than just Hillary Clinton liberalism, more than just your run-of-the-mill globalism, I feel like my gut's telling me that what we're looking at is more along the lines of a Jesuit coup in the United States for the purposes of setting up a puppet for the Pope of Rome and in this case the Jesuit Pope of Rome, Pope Francis, to set into motion the final stages of what has been planned in secret by the Luciferian elite for many centuries.
As you well know, and I'm not saying this to inform you, but to inform our listeners, and I'm interrupting myself, but this pertains to what I want to say. You came out with episode 2, The Holy See. That is so excellent. And I recommend that to people. people can afford that, watch that film that Gen 6 put out, because it directly relates to what we're talking about here. And that is, and clear back in 1990, when I was doing thousands of hours into researching the Illuminati, I realized that the Catholic Church had to play a big role in bringing in the New World Order agenda. It was a major pillar. Now, where I've tried to warn people to get the bigger picture is, don't think the Catholic Church is the only place that evil is. Don't think that all evil derives from the Catholic Church. There's a lot of evil spread out in a lot of different organizations, but the primary religious organization that has the power to bring in a lot of this agenda is the Catholic Church and the Pope. And like you bring out this whole thing of the Great Deception, in order for them to pull off that Great Deception, they have to have religious leaders come forward and say, oh, yeah, the Bible's not right. We've just now gotten new information from the aliens that, we've got the proof. We've got, we've been working with them for years and they've shown us this. And so, we need to revise things. We need a new understanding. Illuminati leaders have basically told me exactly what you were bringing out in your episode 2, The Holy See. They've said, this is coming. The aliens are going to rule us. They're going to be the enlightened ones. And I thought it was kind of bold that they would tell me this, but then I thought, I almost fell off my chair when you interviewed this guy about the telescope there.
Right, Mount Graham. Yep.
Lucifer telescope. And he just said, well, the reason why we got it is because the mountain is a portal, and later the Apache talked about it being a Stargate. Exactly. That's what I thought it was. But you guys got the proof. I was like, when they put in that telescope, you'll notice I didn't write many articles about it because the telescope is not sitting there on the mountain because they're wanting to see something in outer space. I suspected it was a portal, and you guys discovered that it was.
Well, yeah, we have to credit Tom Horn. Tom Horn was the one who went up and did the investigation on Mount Graham and really broke the ice on this topic and brought it to the public purview. And what's amazing, Fritz, is as you know, having seen the film, I was in Rome. We were doing all kinds of things in Rome, exploring many different topics of research. We were really wanting to know if the Vatican was hiding the bones of giants. I mean, that was one of our primary queries when we were in Rome. And so I sat down with a guy named Leo Zagami, very controversial guy, but he's a Vatican researcher second to none. And the guy's information concerning the Vatican has been extremely accurate. Also, he wrote a book called Confessions of an Illuminati, the first volume, and then he's got a second volume coming out. He sent me the first volume to read, and I thought it was a great book. In fact, I think it actually confirms a lot of your research and things I've heard you say. But anyways, I was there to ask Leo about the Vatican vaults and if he had any information on anything pertaining to the bones of giants and a cover-up relating to artifacts relating to the pre-flood world. So I sat down with Leo, and I sat down with the guy that Leo wanted to bring with him, Gian Mario Firamonti. And Firamonti is a very well-known guy in Italy. He's run for political office. He's a very rich man. He's an entrepreneur, and he's a very interesting man. He was personal friends with Zecharia Sitchin. Of course, Zecharia Sitchin is one of the founding fathers of ancient astronaut theory, because of his interpretations of the Sumerian cylinder seals and tablets. Of course, the Anunnaki and everything relating. Sure.
Just for the sake of the listeners, I have some big reservations about Sitchin, but anyway, go ahead.
Oh, no. So
wanted to throw that
so
in.
do we,
They'll
and
look to
so do we.
validate his-
Well, no. We in our film we deal with Zecharia Sitchin's material, and we contrast it with our point of view, with our perspective, which is a Genesis 6 worldview, as opposed to a Anunnaki, a Sumerian cylinder seal worldview, and we take a good amount of time to break that down and to explain to people the difference between the views and why we should rely on the Genesis 6 account rather than the ancient astronaut theory. So we're not in any way endorsing Zecharia Sitchin or his work, although I will say that Sitchin was aiming in the right direction, but he was missing the target, because he rejected the biblical narrative in favor of the Sumerian narrative, which was Nimrod, the Tower of Babel. It was the rebels against God. That was the narrative that he adopted, and his translations of the Sumerian texts are, when you do any research into it, you'll discover that in terms of peer-reviewed work, his work is not very highly regarded among other scholars.
You mentioned Nimrod, and then, Babylon. Well, just to the northeast of Babylon was a city that was devoted to Nergal. And who's Nergal? If you look at the Babylonian, Mesopotamian belief system, Nergal was identical to what we call Satan. And this whole city with its pyramid and its temples was all devoted to Satan worship. And its name was Kuta. It's mentioned in 2 Kings chapter 17 in the Bible. And what happened with the priests of Kuta? When the Assyrians captured the northern kingdom, which was 10 tribes, and they took those 10 tribes to Assyria and put them up on the border of Assyria to be a buffer to protect, that's where they settled them. They resettled the Holy Land, the land that these 10 tribes of Israel had been in. They resettled them with the priests of Kuta. And those priests of Kuta became what's called the Samaritan. That's why the Samaritan people were very well known for having magicians. And you can see some of that in Acts. But anyway, I'm going somewhere with this. They worshipped Mount Hermon. And then you guys mentioned when Christ went up to Mount Hermon and there was a Greek temple there. And when he was at the Greek temple, he was saying the gates of hell will not prevail against me. Okay, well, the Samaritans looked at that mountain as a portal, and then Christ makes that statement, the gates of hell will not prevail. There's a whole level of understanding all of that that's not known. And so I wanted to build upon that.
That's very interesting.
Yeah, and Kuta was built by Cush. And Cush and Nimrod are the progenitors, the ancestors of the modern Rothschilds. And when I was dealing with these people that were Rothschild bloodline that were trying to escape from the Illuminati, I was told that their secret books, their secret genealogy books, trace them back to Nimrod.
That's right.
And then Nimrod's people were Cushites, and the Cushites, I was able to trace them moving into the Khazar area and mixing with the Khazars. And then Khazaria was ruled by a King Bulan, who automatically declared all of his people to be Jews. And so there was a mixture of actually a few actual Jews with a lot of Asiatics. And so they're not even, most of the Khazar Jews are not even actually bloodline Israelites. They're not related to, people talk about the Semites and they say, anti-Semite, but they're not even Semite, but that's a whole nother story. But from Kuta there was a set of priests that branched off that was the Quraysh tribe. And guess who's descended from that Quraysh tribe? Muhammad and King Hussein in Jordan. So there's all these descendants from those satanic priesthood that are prominent. And so there's a whole nother level there of understanding this Luciferian agenda. And Kuta has not been written about I've done a number of articles on it because I think it's a key to understanding a lot of this. Here's another thing I know I'm kind of jumping in and taking the floor, but I'm a history buff, and as you know, I went to West Point. I'm very interested in military history, and I've done intensive study of World War II. So I was reading about at the end of World War II, they established a committee to go to all of the different churches that had been destroyed in Europe, and they were to inventory the damage. And here's what they found. This relates directly to your research, Tim. When this committee went they went to like 200 churches, and these are all like old Catholic churches or Protestant churches that used to be Catholic churches. They found all of these churches were built on ancient pagan holy sites, and under the Catholic altars, they discovered in the ruins of these Catholic churches, they discovered pagan altars.
That's amazing. We actually were in a church in Sardinia, which will probably be featured in our next episode. We were in a church in Sardinia it was a very ancient, it was a temple. It was an ancient temple in Sardinia. Nobody knows who built it. There's some speculation that it was the Phoenicians that built it. Nobody knows. It's a very strange pagan temple, and it almost has a Mesopotamian feel to it. And what makes this church so unique in Sardinia is that the Catholic Church literally basically built right over. No, that's not even the right way to say it. They didn't just build over the ruins of this strange ancient pagan church. They literally built upon the pillars of this strange ancient pagan church. They left some of the very altar. The altar of this pagan church, of this pagan temple, is now the Catholic altar. It's the altar that they do Mass on. And if you look around in the church, there's these strange figurines of all kinds of creatures. On the outside of the building, there is a depiction of what appears to be a gray alien with the almond-shaped eyes and the bulbous head and so forth. It was an extremely bizarre Catholic church. In fact, they're right, just as you say, Fritz, the altar, right next to the altar, under the altar, is an underground cavity that the Catholics used as a baptismal pool. And we asked
this is the rule. This is not an exception.
You're absolutely right.
It's the way they did it.
It is the rule. And underneath this pagan altar, there is this baptismal pool. And the priest who was about to do Mass in this little town in Sardinia let us go down underneath the altar. Wow. So we removed the great covering that was covering up the stairs, and I couldn't believe he was letting us go down there, and we had to do it quick because he was about to start Mass on the pagan altar. So we go down underneath the altar, and there's this baptismal pool dating back to the Middle Ages. But the intriguing thing is that there's a very crudely built brick wall that was blocking entry to the rest of the underground complex beneath the church. And there was a little hole, like a drainage hole or something. I don't even know how to describe it. It was probably 2 feet high by 2 feet wide that was still open, that they didn't brick over. So I mean, a dog could pass through it, but I couldn't get through it. But I took my flashlight and we were looking down in there. Obviously, this was a very large cavern underneath this church, or a cavity underneath this church. And the rumor has it that many interesting bones were discovered inside of this thing. Some people say that the bones of giants were under there, some of the Sardinians, that there was a cover-up relating to the bones of giants and so forth. But so here you have a Catholic presence on top. They didn't destroy the pagan church and rebuild a Catholic cathedral there. They literally incorporated the pagan symbolism and the pagan artifacts within the church and just incorporated it into their Catholic rituals and into their mass. And literally, as we're coming back up out of this underground cavity beneath the altar of the church, the pagan altar, they're already started mass. I mean, it was bizarre. We're coming out, here's the priest, and they're doing mass on a pagan altar, and we're emerging from underneath the pagan altar in this underground cavity, which obviously has been purposefully blocked off. They put cylinder blocks there, mortared it off, and I mean, it's in your face everywhere you go. What you said is absolutely true. And it is the rule and not the exception. And I want to take the opportunity right now. First of all, let me finish also what I was saying before for those who, I kind of left them on a cliffhanger there. I spoke to Leo Zagami in Rome, and then we walked around the Vatican together at nighttime, and he was showing us some things, including that church that you were talking about. But we were able to penetrate into the Jesuit headquarters, the Gesu, the headquarters of the Jesuits, where the Black Pope lives, where the general of the Jesuits live. I mean, we were in his building in the lobby, but it's a very small entryway, and there's just basically a security post there with the Jesuit symbol on the wall, and you can see this in our film. And we're talking. I'm talking with Leo Zagami in the Jesuit headquarters precisely about Mount Graham and about what the Jesuits are doing there. So here we are in the Jesuit headquarters talking about what the Jesuits are doing at Mount Graham, and we have Jesuits walking in as we're talking, giving us very nasty looks, and they're obviously not happy about this, and there's security cameras all over the place, so they knew we were down there filming. And so, I mean, we had a couple of Jesuits walk in on us and basically just stop and cross their arms and give us the death stare as we're talking. And you'll see in the film that Leo kind of lowers his voice. And precisely at the point, Fritz, where one of these guys walked in, and I'm kind of looking over to the side looking at him, is when Leo's talking about how the Jesuits are interested in the knowledge of the Watchers. That the Jesuits are very interested in finding the tribal groups around the world, some of these native peoples and these other cultures that had contact with the Watchers. And I find this interesting because Zagami claims to be an ex-Illuminati. And he told me he comes from an Illuminati family, the Lion family, and that both on his father's side and his mother's side, he's also connected to the some of the royal lines in Italy. And he told me that the Illuminati, his family included, claimed to descend directly from the bloodline of the Watchers through Nimrod, just as you said. So way back into the pre-flood dynamic of the Watchers, descending from them, that bloodline was maintained somehow through Nimrod. So they traced themselves back through Nimrod and then further back to the Watchers. And at this juncture, I want to, for those who have not seen our film, The Unholy Sea, True Legends, Episode 2, The Unholy Sea, I want to encourage people to see the film because the things that are unfolding right now and that are about to unfold are directly relevant to the content of our film. We're trying to preempt these things, and we did preempt a lot of what's coming to prepare people. So at this juncture, I'm going to play the trailer of our film for those who have not seen it. For those who have, you can just fast forward 3 minutes and you'll be back to our conversation.
They say this thing had been dead for maybe a day or two. We estimated his size at approximately 12 to 10 feet tall. The giant killed the first team that they came across. He was extremely big and fast and agile for a guy that size.
The popes and the agents of the Holy See have known about the giants for many centuries.
And do you believe that they have artifacts from the past that would help explain some of what's going on?
Absolutely sure.
The Vatican knows all the secrets. Secretly preparing for the arrival of alien saviors.
They seem to be intentionally creating dogma that is going to position the Roman Catholic Church to be at the forefront of an official disclosure moment.
The Vatican is involved in ufology in ways that we can't even imagine.
So while we're standing here in the headquarters of the Jesuits, tell us about Mount Graham.
They are constantly monitoring things with the Lucifer device. Sometimes they have to wait for all of the UFOs to get out of the way.
I would like to tell you more about Zecharia Sitchin. He told me, John Mario, one night I wake up and I saw an Anunnaki sitting on my bed.
History is being repeated. The days of Noah are returning.
The gods are returning to the earth to dwell among men and mingle their seed with the human race.
Only the truth can prepare us for the lie that's coming.
That was the trailer to True Legends Episode 2, The Unholy See. You can get the film at truelegendstheseries.com if you're interested in watching our film. It's getting rave reviews all over the internet, and we have it in DVD, Blu-ray, and unlimited online streaming via Vimeo for those who are interested in the film. And also, I want to encourage everybody to go to pentrax.com to get Fritz Springmeier's material, the books he's written, especially Bloodlines of the Illuminati, which is a fascinating book. It really, for those who are interested in the Illuminati, it's a must-read. Fritz really lays out in great detail who they are and the families that are involved in this organization that we generally call the Illuminati. And that's pentrax.com, pentracs.com. You can also find a link to Fritz's website in the description of this video. So Fritz, I want to continue where we left off. We were talking about the Vatican. We were talking about the church's MO of building on top of pagan temples or on top of ancient, very interesting ancient archaeological sites that are of great import to history.
Well, the people I was helping come out of the Illuminati, one of them who was fairly high up in the women's branch of the Illuminati was explaining to me spiritual dynamics and demonology, and a particular geographic area has layers of spirits on it. And so one of the reasons why they build these Catholic churches on these sacred sites is because there has always been this Luciferian element within the Catholic Church. What they're trying to do is they're trying to build upon the local geographic demons in the area. which also relates to the portals. But going back, in my Bloodlines of the Illuminati book, as well as my Be Wise as Serpents book, I mentioned someone. His name is Sir John Dee. As you know, he was Queen Elizabeth's advisor, and he was the top magician in England at the time. And he said that he was getting information from these demons or these spirits that he was conjuring with Enochian magic, and they look like what we call the small grays. What's interesting is you guys mentioned that the Large Hadron Collider there at CERN, and they have Enochian letters, Enochian magical alphabet letters there at CERN, and these are used to conjure demons through Enochian magic. So we've got this whole thing of demonology coming in here with all these Catholic churches and CERN.
That's exactly right. And if I can interject, when talking about CERN, what's interesting is people look at CERN as a purely scientific endeavor. But and you'll get a lot of flack, and I get a lot of flack, and anybody who dares to suggest that there could be some kind of an occult activity happening at CERN or some kind of an occult agenda behind CERN will ridicule you endlessly, because they see it as a exclusively scientific organization, a scientific endeavor. But what they're failing to realize is that, you mentioned John Dee, that back in the 16th century, the scientists, that's when really during the Renaissance, when the scientific method and what we know as modern science, the machinations of modern science, really were birthed during the Renaissance and during the 16th century. And John Dee was, as you said, a conjurer of demons. He was a magician. In other words, he was for lack of a better term, he was a warlock working for Queen Elizabeth and a confidant of Queen Elizabeth's. And he was considered, at the time, one of the leading scientific minds. I mean, he was very prominent in the world of navigation, and he was really second to none when it came to training navigators. And of course, England had the premier navigators on Earth at the time. That was John Dee. I mean, those were his equations that helped the navigators of England, of the British Empire, really get their start. It was him. In other words, it was the technology that came from the science that he was conducting. And this is my point. Science and technology, technology and the occult. Science and the occult are intertwined and always have been from the beginning. You can't really divide the two. When you really delve deep into what we call science and even certain kinds of technologies, the veil between the physical and the metaphysical is very, very thin. And especially when you deal with quantum physics and you deal with things on the quantum level. I mean, it's the quantum level, to put it into very rudimentary terms, is displaying metaphysical properties. So, John Dee, of course, is considered to be, by many people, the tutor of Francis Bacon. And of course, Francis Bacon is known as the father of modern science. Francis Bacon was a Rosicrucian and was very likely the head of the Rosicrucian order in his day. And so here you have Francis Bacon, the father of modern science, who was tutored by John Dee, who was conjuring demons using Enochian magic. And Francis Bacon is involved in both very high-level intellectual, scientific, and literary endeavors. I mean, the guy was a genius, Francis Bacon, one of the greatest scientific minds of all time. But at the same time, what is completely overlooked is the fact that he also was involved in very high-level occult practices, even attempting to contact and channel entities, non-human entities. He had a muse who he called Athena, referring to the goddess Athena of the Greeks. And there's speculation, of course, that Francis Bacon is in fact William Shakespeare, and I believe that. I do. I believe that, and that's a whole other conversation. But so here you have the father of modern science, who's really the greatest proponent of the scientific method, solid scientific experimentation. This is coming out of Francis Bacon. He is pushing this idea of the scientific method, and he is developing modern science, and at the same time, he is channeling demonic entities, and he is involved in, by the way, also the colonization scheme of the United States. And the Rosicrucians were some of the first orders to come over to the United States, along with the Pilgrims. So my point is this, Fritz. When we talk about science, and when we talk about the physical and the metaphysical world, science and metaphysics, you're talking about something that is inherently combined. You're talking about something that these are not ideas, opposing ideas. These two things are very much entwined. They're very much it's a combination of physics and metaphysics. And this is exactly what John Dee believed. It's exactly what Francis Bacon believed, and their acolytes, who were the fathers of many different branches of science, who came later on after John Dee and after Francis Bacon through the Renaissance. So my point is simply this: all of these intellectuals who are out there espousing this higher realm of scientific exploration and thought, and are rolling their eyes at anything that has to do with spirituality or metaphysics, they are misinformed. They are not adepts in the scientific world as they think they are, because the true adepts in the scientific world understand that metaphysics and physics are two sides of the same coin.
Well, I'm going to jump in here and say some obvious ways, some signs that people can see of what you were talking about is if you look at NASA's symbols and the names that they give to things, they're very much into the occult. And you look at CERN, 666 in their logo, and like so many people have mentioned the Shiva rituals and statue and everything. So they themselves link themselves to the occult. And so, yeah, indeed, if you look at the individuals that are involved in these things, you will see that there's a mixture. There's some people that are scientists that are atheists, and then there's some people that are very much into Satanism, Luciferianism, and so forth. So what really, I loved one of the things, and I want to say this about you because I admire your integrity, Tim. I admire your intelligence and admire your research. And one of the things that I value about you is that when you don't know something as a fact, you'll be frank and admit it instead of try to pull the wool over people's eyes. And you and I both are on the same page about CERN, and that is we're suspicious about it, but we don't know exactly what it's all involved about. We know that they have found the Higgs boson particle. We know that they found the pentaquark. They found different things. So they've actually done some scientific research along with this. But what makes me really suspicious about the LHC there at CERN is the Europeans spent $4.4 billion just to build it. And you have countries like Greece, Spain, Portugal, whose economies are on the brink of total disaster, and they're contributing every year millions to this. What is behind this? And I know the leaders of these countries are into this Luciferian agenda. They're dark people. Why would these people be spending so much money when their economies are in such bad shape? Why are all these European countries contributing to CERN? There's got to be a different agenda than just they want to find a pentaquark.
That's right. And science is merely the decoding of the mechanisms of the natural world. So when we say science, we're not talking about some high and mighty institution that is reserved only for the elite thinkers of society. Science is decoding the natural world. So is mathematics. Every form of science is merely looking at the physical world around us and deconstructing it and seeing what the constituent parts are and trying to understand how those mechanisms work. That's what science is. And so there's a lot of scientists, including at CERN, particle physicists and theoretical physicists, who are doing honest work, who believe that they are in fact trying to understand how the universe began at the Big Bang. That's what their lives are about. They're obsessed with it. Anybody who doubts that, watch the documentary Particle Fever that deals with CERN, and you're going to see exactly how obsessed these people are. It is an obsession. And so when they're trying to decode how matter works on the quantum level, what they're doing, whether they admit it or not, whether it is intentional or not, they are getting down to the level of the mechanisms of matter that begin to blur with the metaphysical mechanisms behind matter. That's what's happening. And when they get down to that level and when they penetrate deep enough, it is inevitable, absolutely inevitable, that they are going to run into the metaphysical world, because it is two sides of the same coin, the physical and the metaphysical. They're not divorced from one another. It helps for people to consider the physical and the metaphysical being separated by a veil that perhaps is put there for our benefit, because there are things, I believe, Fritz, that are behind that veil that are being held there by God, that are being restrained there by God. But see, we have authority as human beings on the earth, and if we decide to go and puncture that veil willfully, then we're going to reap the consequences of whatever comes through the puncture that we create. So, yes, the CERN situation. Most of the people involved in CERN at the Large Hadron Collider have particle fever, are absolutely obsessed with science, with physics, with particle physics specifically. They have nothing to do with the occult. In their minds, they are just absolutely consumed in their work. They want to understand the way that matter works on a quantum level. They want to discover new particles. That's their obsession in life. They mock us and they look at us and say, you guys are crazy. We work here. It's only about particle physics. But that's because they don't understand that above them, that their benefactors, just like you said, Fritz, the people who are paying for the experimentation, the people who are paying to keep the lights on at the Large Hadron Collider, are in many cases adepts of the Luciferian doctrine. These are mystery school initiates. These are men and women who are involved in these occult secret societies who understand the metaphysical dynamics that are in play in the physical world. And they're using the scientists to accumulate the data that they need. They're using them as tools in their hands. So people cannot look at science and scientists as the end game. It's not just about what the scientists want or what the scientists' desire is in a particular experiment. People need to understand that the old adage is just as true in the scientific world as it is anywhere else. Follow the money. Where is the funding coming from? Who are the organizations? Who are the people who are funding this stuff?
You know, when we look at the in the Word of God about the Tower of Babel, it has a verse in there that says that there was no restrictions on what they could do. In other words, because they had been given this angelic technology, this alien, if you want to call it alien technology, that there was no limits on what they could do. And I'm going to, now that I said that I'm on the same page as you, that we don't do speculation, I want to do a little speculation here because I think it might be interesting to people. I believe, this is just my own beliefs, and I'm going to throw it out there because I think it's worth people thinking about this. Tesla said that our minds really are like an antenna, that we're tapping into knowledge that's outside of us. There's something here, I believe. I don't know the exact mechanism. I've tried to study it out, but nobody knows for sure exactly, or at least we haven't gotten to the point where it's agreed upon how the brain works. But I think it's a misconception to think that the larger your brain, the smarter you are. Because if you look at a hummingbird, and I can't get into it really, but a hummingbird does some amazing things, and yet its brain is almost weightless. And so its brain is obviously as smart or as genius as it needs to be. I think that there's something to what Tesla said about the way our brain works. And there's a set of people that there's been like 6 people in history that this documented that this has happened to, where they had a large spike hit their brain, and it touched a certain part in the brain that's like a governor that controls what the conscious mind can and can't think about, and they become mathematical geniuses. So these people, you would put them in front of an audience and they would be given a calculus problem that they had never even heard about before, and they can turn around and write on the board this incredible answer. They don't even know how they got it. I believe that God put a governor on our brains to control what we could consciously know. And I think our unconscious brains tap into knowledge and intelligence that's way beyond what our conscious minds know. So when you're a baseball player in the professionals and somebody goes up to bat and you're in the outfield and they hit that ball and that ball is coming towards you, your mind is working calculus problems of the highest order, and it's coordinating hundreds of muscles in a very complex way to, in a few split seconds, you run and you put your mitt up and you catch that ball. Your brain has done incredible amount of calculations on the subconscious level. Consciously, you're not even aware of what the brain is working through. So I think that there's a governor there that God, because he's concerned about us learning, he's tried to limit us from becoming evil geniuses. And I don't think that's brought out by people, is that there's certain limits to what God wants. Because I hear a lot of people saying, well, technology is value free. A television is not, there's nothing evil inherent in television. Well, if you look at Hollywood and televisions and how it's been used, yes, it's been used for evil. Granted, it could possibly be used for good, like we're going to use this video. But in general, some of these inventions just have an evil purpose, or the results of them are just evil. And so I think God has tried to cap how far man could go so that they're not like back in the Tower of Babel, where we don't reach the point where we could do anything. And because we're not spiritually enlightened in a good way, that we become evil geniuses. Anyway, I just want to throw that in because I don't think a lot of people have thought about that.
Well, and I would encourage people to consult G.H. Pember's book, Earth's Earliest Ages, because he actually talks about precisely what you're talking about here, that he believed, and I do also, I subscribe to the idea that there is so much going on around us in the, if you want to call it the spiritual realm, the metaphysical world. And human beings in the fallen state that we are simply cannot handle the information and the revelation of what is actually taking place around us on a daily basis. And I can attest that that is in fact the truth. A lot of people, a lot of Christians have a desire to see angels or even to see demons. Believe me, you don't want to. Believe me. Take my word for it, you do not want to. Our fallen, degenerate state is incapable of processing that kind of information. And when I say that kind of information, I mean visually, I mean emotionally. We are incapable of processing it. And so I believe that there's a dampering effect that has been implemented in our minds, in our brains, exactly what you're talking about, that is divinely divinely orchestrated so that we can be protected from the literally mind-blowing realities that are taking place in the unseen realm around us. You would go crazy. Any normal human being, any fallen human being that's living with our condition of sin and death and our degenerate genome, there's no way that you would not go crazy if you were to be able to see the denizens of the spiritual realm all the time. If you were able to have constant exposure to the metaphysical world, you would go foaming at the mouth crazy. Day and night exposure to the darkness that is happening. Remember, we are small points of light as believers in a very, very dark world, in a sea of darkness.
And that may be part of what's happening to Hillary.
It may be.
She has gotten into so much demonology, it's screwed her mind up.
And that is attested in the fact that if you study, for example, Aleister Crowley, and his what was it called in Italy, his little thelemic his little thelemic retreat that he constructed in Italy, and I believe it was Mussolini who kicked him out of the country because it was so depraved. But they would purposely conduct, they would purposely behave in the most reprehensible manner possible. I mean, they would do the most repulsive things sexually, to one another, involving animals, involving children, the most reprehensible acts of the sinful nature that they could conceive of. They were practicing with this in his little thelemic retreat there in Italy. And if you study that, you find out that almost everybody involved in that went nuts, out of their mind, crazy, and were screwed up for the rest of their lives. And that is precisely because when you tear the veil between you and the metaphysical world, sometimes God will allow us to peer into that world, but He strengthens us to be able to do that. He gives us the revelation, and He gives us the fortitude. He provides us with the fortitude to be able to peer into those metaphysical realities. But when people delve into the metaphysical world through illicit means, through the occult, through blood sacrifices, and the things that the Illuminati do, the things that the Luciferian elite do routinely, what happens is you get intruders into your reality. You get the denizens of that world they now have an access into your life, and they begin to interact with you in a very real way. And let me tell you, there is no way for these people to shut it off, to turn it off. Once they open the door, they cannot shut it. Only God can shut those doors once they're opened. We can open them. We have the authority to open them, but we do not have the power that is necessary to shut them. And that is what is so dangerous about the occult. Imagine, again, the veil. A very thin veil that separates the physical and the metaphysical. And behind that veil on the metaphysical side are multitudes of non-human and demonic entities waiting for the opportunity to penetrate into your life, to penetrate into your sphere of reality, the physical world. and they're waiting for you to do that one seemingly simplistic occultic act, to have access to your life, to have authority in your life, and to be able to manifest in the physical realm. Now, there are many different kinds of entities behind that veil. And there are possessing entities, which are the spirits of the Nephilim, which I want to get into the Nephilim stuff with you here in a minute. But the disembodied spirits of the giants and of the Nephilim from the pre-flood world are looking for host bodies. They are craving host bodies. And there are certain parameters, there are certain mechanisms by which they can enter into a human body, take possession of that body and the mind, torment that body, and use it for their own lustful purposes. And as we know from the scriptures, there can be a legion of these entities inhabiting one person. And that's just one kind of entity, of spiritual entity, that is operating behind the scenes. There are bodily entities. In other words, there are corporeal entities, flesh and blood creatures also that are demonic, that are operating in a very contained sphere of authority on and under the earth. And so the occult is exceedingly real. This spiritual realm is the metaphysical world, again, is beyond our ability to process. Truly, it has to be filtered for us. That's why we see as through a glass darkly. We have to be wearing shades. In other words, metaphorically speaking, to be able to even have a glimpse of what is behind that veil.
Well, and I absolutely concur with what you just said. When I was younger in sixth grade, there was I had a really nice teacher, Mrs. Minakami, and she was like 25, 30, and she said, I innocently allowed someone to hypnotize me, and after that, she started having reoccurring nightmares of just tons of snakes around her. And the thing of it is the little button that allows these things to happen, like you were saying, it is so subtle. People don't realize how subtle the green light is to allow these nefarious things to take over our lives is. And a lot of people crawling with a lot of demons and aren't even aware of how they have allowed these things into their life. I just totally concur with everything you're saying. Now, you wanted to talk about the Nephilim, so I'm going to take the bull by the horns here. And I wanted to see there's a whole subject here that I have not been willing to talk about. And it's only been like this last year that I have allowed myself to feel comfortable talking about it. And why have I kept this whole area secret? I'll go into that. But the reason why I feel comfortable talking about it now is because you guys have been exposing some 3D facts about the Nephilim. And I'm beginning to feel more comfortable talking about some of these things. This is such a vast topic. I don't even know where to start on it, but I guess I'll start with the four ladies. I was telling you about four women that had been teamed together in the Illuminati. And I guess for the benefit of our listeners, I'll tell sort of a medium size or the short version, as short as I can make it, of how this all came about. I've been doing thousands of hours, literally thousands of hours of research into the Illuminati as someone from the outside looking in. I wasn't an insider, so I had to go through old documents. I had to go through people that said that, over the centuries that they had interaction with it, like James Robison. He wrote this book, Proofs of a Conspiracy, where he goes in and says, and he was one of these, one of the, James Robison was actually one of the leading scientists during the time of our American Revolution, that time period. He was one of the leading scientists in the world, and he was a high-ranking Freemason, and he saw how the Illuminati illuminized all the Masonic lodges, so he exposed the Illuminati because he had good sources and so forth. I was researching that way, and then one of my friends, a Christian brother, was walking by 4 women, and he heard them say the word Illuminati. And so he's a people person. He turned around and goes, "Hey, if you're interested in Illuminati, you got to meet my friend. He's done all this research into Illuminati." Well, it turns out that those 4 women had been teamed together in the Illuminati, and they were trying to get out. So they were like a support team for each other to escape. And anyway, when I got talking with them, they found me fascinating. I found them fascinating. Finally, I had a collaborative, good source to tell me from what the Illuminati was from the inside. And they told me that there were 2 important concepts. There was the concept of the bloodlines, and there were the concept of the mind control. But when they were describing the rituals, they said, and this is back in 1991, before anybody was talking about Nephilim. So you'll have to understand why I didn't do much with this kind of stuff, is because a lot of things that I was told by eyewitnesses back during those time when I was doing that early research, I was like, I don't know what to do with this. I just got to put this stuff up on the shelf. But they were saying that the Nephilim, who they called guardians, were participants in Illuminati, high-level Illuminati rituals, and that they had the members that were doing the rituals terrified because they were the enforcers. If somebody got out of line, they would tear them apart. And
did they give you a description of these guardians? Were they unusually large? Were they maybe not even human looking? Were they human looking?
They were sort of like human looking, and they were strong. That's the only thing that and they were scary because they were mean. And that's the limit of how much I didn't ask too many questions on it, because I didn't realize that it would later become such an important subject.
But to be clear, these women described to you these guardians that were involved in some of these occult rituals, referring to them as Nephilim. And in terms of their attributes, they were very fierce and strong and fearful.
Yeah, exactly. And, they also described, being taken to underground installations. And I was able to move forward some on the information, but I was like researching like you. And then there was somebody that said, and this I considered, this was, I learned this back like 91 or 92, and I considered it very significant. They said, if you want to understand the New World Order, you need to understand the portals and the kivas of the Hopis and that whole phenomenon, just sort of like Mount Graham and the Apache portal there. And the Hopis are like the tribe of Levi for the Israelites. They are a special Indian tribe of priests. And so I was trying to understand the portals and the Kiva and what the Hopis had, their belief system. And I realized that there was something there, but I couldn't move forward on it. It's because I needed some of the pieces that you guys put together. I knew there was something there, but I didn't know. I didn't have I guess what I'm saying is I had a lot of witnesses telling me stuff, but I didn't have the 3D archaeological evidence that you guys have found, which makes it so you guys are putting the pieces together that made what I learned years ago have some value. Because I'm like you, I don't want to move forward, and I'm not afraid of the Illuminati. I mean, I've exposed these people That's not where my fear comes from. My fear is that I would put out something that's not true. And if I can't validate it, I back off and just keep it to myself a lot of times.
Right, and that's and I commend you for that. That's an appropriate way to approach research, because the last thing we want to do is send people down the wrong path with information that is not entirely accurate. Which sometimes that happens whether you intend it or not, because sometimes you get bad information, or sometimes you learn later on that there's a better source of information than the one that you were using, and so forth. But in terms of, I find this intriguing when you're talking about the Hopi and the Kivas and the portals, because you may not know this, but we are actually teamed up with Tom Horn at this point, Gen 6 Productions. Tom is on the ground level of our True Legend series in our next episode, episode 3. And Tom actually went on an expedition of his own a couple of years ago with his team at Skywatch TV, and they went down into at least one of those kivas, and associated with those kivas, not inside of the kiva itself, but on a canyon wall associated with the kivas and with the Hopi and with the native tribes there, were these petroglyphs that were depicting, exactly like you said, a portal. And things coming out of the portal, non-human looking things that were coming out of the portal. And there were giant six-toed footprints following little five-toed footprints. And the explanation that they derived from that, having spoken with the natives, is that there was a fierce race of giants that were the enemy of these people, that were feared, and that were devouring these people, and they came through the portals. So I find it fascinating that your contacts would tell you, would reference the kivas and the portals, because obviously what that indicates to me, Fritz, is that these people, obviously they've been aware of this information for a very long time, that this is historical information relating to these metaphysical realities that are the information that is very tightly controlled behind the scenes by the elite, and not only controlled, but is actually being used, that has a purpose for them, that they're actually actively trying to make contact with these entities, reopen these portals. So again, that's a fascinating confirmation of some of the very projects that we're getting ready to launch here next month with Tom Horn concerning these very things.
So then I want to take us in a really strange direction here. It relates to what we're talking about, to the Nephilim and all of this. And it's the subject I keep saying that I have not talked about for years. And I'm going to kind of take the floor here and go with it, because now this is finally I'm kind of, this year I'm finally coming out with this, and I have just been, well, anyway, I'll just start in. I grew up from 1960 on in a country called Nepal. That's between India and Tibet. And I was on the trail with my father when I was like 8 years old to Mount Everest. I didn't go into the snow-capped mountains, but I got up to them. I knew Tenzing Norgay and Sir Edmund Hillary, who were the first ones to climb Mount Everest. I met them personally. My next door neighbor was Willie Unsold from Oregon, who was the first American to climb Mount Everest. And when Willie Unsold and his crew got back down from Everest, I was there where they first stopped, because they had frostbite all over their feet, and talked with them. So this whole area, Sir Edmund Hillary was interested, and some of these other mountain climbers have been interested in trying to get to the bottom of the abominable snowman, the Yeti legends. And the name over here in the United States for it all is Bigfoot. And so very early on in life, I was interested in, that was the first big mystery of the New World Order that I was trying to decipher was, and you probably are similar to me, you latch on to a research subject and you don't want to let go of it. And so I was really fascinated with this whole subject. And I came across, well, the first book that I read, when I was in second grade, my parents got me a book, Tintin in Tibet, which was a comic book, a hardcover copy book that was acclaimed by the Dalai Lama and got awards from the Dalai Lama. It's just about this airplane crash in Nepal in the Himalayas, and then Tintin goes to rescue people, and on the way to rescue people in the Himalayas, they see this abominable snowman. Okay, so that was my first place where I got in contact with it. My next literary contact with the whole thing was this massive tome of a book, 550 pages, by Ivan T. Sanderson. And he wrote this book, Abominable Snowman, Legend Come to Life. And he wrote it like he was a biologist. And he wrote about all these different kinds of species that all around the world were like Bigfoot, including in South America where you've lived. He wrote about it being on all the different continents, but it wasn't one species. It was different species. And he gave all these biological details, people finding faces and all of this stuff. So at that point in time, I was thinking, okay, we're dealing with something that's different kinds of humanoids that are afraid of people. They're in the remote areas where people can't get to them, and then in 1967, when I was back in the United States and I was working on my grandfather's farm, they came out, and this was probably before your time and a lot of the listeners' time, so it's why I'm mentioning it. They showed a film in the movie theaters, the Patterson-Gimlin film. These guys were out in near Bluff Creek, California, and they filmed a Sasquatch or a Bigfoot running, and Hollywood people said that the film was authentic, that it couldn't be faked. And this plays a big part in what later happened with me, is because I went and I watched that in the movie theater. And so you have a film that seems to be authenticating the whole idea that there's these big humanoids, Bigfoot out there. And so I was watching for the reaction, because NASA and the U.S. government was funding. Just in 1971 alone, NASA spent $10 billion on a program that was called the Cyclops SETI program. Now, it's interesting that they called this search for ET intelligence is what the SETI SETI and Yeti sound very similar. And Cyclops, Cyclops is really, the legend was actually Nephilim. This is one of the Nephilim we're talking about, Cyclops. And so they got the Cyclops SETI program, but where are they looking for life? Supposedly they're looking for life in outer space. And they spent, in 1971, $10 billion on this. Okay, but this film comes out about the Yeti, about the abominable snowman. And so I was thinking, okay, National Geographic, our government, all these universities that are researching to find strange life, they're going to be interested. They weren't. Total silence. There was nothing. None of these agencies, nobody that should have shown at least a glimmer of interest showed any, and that scared me. It was like, okay, I'm understanding better now what the abominable snowman are. I understand better what the Bigfoot are. This is related to the government. And the government is calling these institutions up and saying, hey, we're not investigating this. We're not saying anything about this film. We're not going anywhere with this subject. And it scared me. And at that time, I didn't have my calling from God to expose all of this. So I realized this subject is not going anywhere because it's connected to the power structure. It's connected to our government. At that time, I didn't know about the Illuminati, but I could realize that the power of our government was clamping down on this. So in 1975, you got this guy, he's a MUFON leader, Stan Gordon. He came out with a book, Silent Invasion, which talks about how he thinks the Bigfoot are connected to, that they're Nephilim, that they're connected to UFOs. And the strange thing about it is if you would go out in the woods and you would get close to a Bigfoot and you can smell them before you could, and then people that would get close to the Bigfoot would start having thoughts in their heads and they would smell them. But here's what would happen if you got close to where the Bigfoot were, and we've got some spots in Oregon where they're Bigfoot. I mean, they're related to UFOs. Men in black would show up. Very scary men in black, and would scare people off. You're not supposed to. And then when a few times people would actually see some of these Bigfoot, their eyes would glow and they would dematerialize. There's a whole level to this subject that relates to demonology, relates to Satanism, relates to flying saucers, relates to the hidden government. And so when I saw you guys start coming out with your Nephilim stuff, I was like, okay, now I can finally open up a little bit about this subject. You know, when you go to these Bigfoot conferences where you have people that are out there hunting for Bigfoot, you know what the biggest bunch of these Bigfoot associations are made up of? Spooks and retired military. Now, why is the government so interested in what anybody could find out about the Bigfoot? Why? That's right there a big clue that they're afraid of us learning about this.
And you know what's interesting, Fritz, is everybody knows about the evidence of Bigfoot. They see it every day, and they see it in their history books, but they don't realize that what they're looking at is evidence of this species. We might call it a subspecies of Nephilim.
A subspecies. I was going to say that. You took the words out of my mouth.
They don't realize that when they're looking at these diagrams that are promoting the evolution of the species and Darwinism, when they're looking at the bones of the Australopithecus and the Homo erectus and these other hominids, that what they're looking at is a subspecies. We did not evolve from this species. This species still exists in the world.
And the Yetis had these big heads. The Yetis had the big heads that you expose.
The elongated skulls, right.
Yes.
So what they do is they actually find the bones of these creatures routinely, and they take them and they display them as if this is the evolutionary trail. This species died off during this period of time, millions of years ago, whatever it is, leading up to Homo sapiens. When really what they're doing is they're displaying the bones of entities, some of which are still alive today, that are not that we did not evolve from these creatures. These creatures are if you want to put them if you want to define their species, again, they're a divergent species of Nephilim, if you want to put it in those terms. These creatures existed and still exist. And then people ask, well, why don't we find them? Why don't we see them? Why don't all these programs going out looking for Bigfoot ever come up with any kind of evidence? And it's exactly because of what you just alluded to. Because these entities are what I refer to as quasi-ethereals, they're not fully corporeal. They have Nephilim blood. There's something spiritual about them. There's a spiritual component. There's a dynamic here, a metaphysical dynamic involved with these creatures that, as you said, sometimes they disappear. Sometimes they're associated with flying saucers. Sometimes these men in black characters come and intimidate people. But what's happening now is just as is happening with the UFO phenomenon. Everybody has a smartphone now, and everybody has relatively high-resolution cameras on their smartphones. So you're getting more and more people catching glimpses of things that are very reminiscent of the Bigfoot creatures. In fact, I lived in the Amazon for some years, and in the Amazon, there are also Bigfoot stories. Of course, they don't refer to it as Bigfoot. There's numerous names for these creatures, and by the way, they vary. There's apparently there's different species of these things living in the Amazon, and we know for certain in the Amazon that there are creatures that are unknown and unseen. In fact, there's an estimated 3 species of life forms discovered every day in the Amazon, and the reason and the reason why these entities have been able to conceal themselves for so long is because rarely are they ever seen or interacted with where people are, where people live. They're in the most remote, inaccessible places of the earth, and those remote, inaccessible places of the earth, in terms of area, in terms of square footage, are definitely the majority of this planet. They make up the majority of the surface area of planet Earth, places that we cannot access or that human beings rarely access, such as the deeps of the Amazon, the uncharted territories of the Amazon, the uncharted territories of Canada, the uncharted territories of Russia. I mean, there are vast tracts of land that human beings simply do not go. We do not tread in these uninhabitable zones. But those who do go into these zones, such as the people with whom I spoke in the Amazon, who go days into the jungle, into the deep of the jungle hunting, come back with these stories and these sightings of these. They're a smaller version of what we call the Bigfoot here in the United States. They're a hominid species. They're about 5 foot tall. They're not monkeys. They're more akin to humans than they are monkeys. Sometimes they have elongated skulls, and they have very unusual, if you want to call them, supernatural properties. Very strange things happen to people who have encounters with these creatures. It's like you're encountering something physical, but there are also supernatural dynamics, metaphysical dynamics involved.
It's interesting you were talking about the inaccessible areas. Now here in Oregon, there's one area, and I went out and tried to do some exploring in it. They had, I had a couple, through a couple sources, that there was a UFO hidden base out in the woods. Well, that whole area, that wilderness area, where there's also abominable snow or big feet. What's interesting is our government has created berms on the roads, or they destroy the road structures in the wilderness. They don't even want people going back in there. They're sealing it off. Like when I went to look for this deactivated UFO base, all the roads in the area had been destroyed or had berms on them, the dirt roads. And this was a remote place. Why would they go to so much trouble? I mean, I could see, okay, put one berm right at the road that's going to branch out to all these others and let it go at that. But why would you go way back into the middle of the wilderness and destroy roads and put in berms and stuff, go to that much trouble? They are really trying to keep people from going back into these areas.
Yes, that's apparent. And I think that at this point in time, it's very difficult it's getting increasingly difficult to cover things up, to cover up the UFO phenomenon. That's virtually impossible at this point in time because of the information age in which we live, that a video can be instantaneously uploaded to YouTube or Facebook, that a picture can be uploaded even faster to YouTube or to Facebook. They can't control it. They can't put a cap on it. The only thing that they can do is seed disinformation and try and keep people out of the most sensitive areas. And those happen to be the areas that people don't go to anyways, either because they have the presence of a military base or because they're so remote. Rarely do people get out there. And if somebody goes out there and has a sighting, it'll just be discredited. That's how they're operating at this point in time. People say all the time, if these things exist, if aliens are real, if Bigfoot is real, if these cryptids actually exist, Why aren't there pictures of them on the internet? Why don't people capture footage of them? And the answer is very simple. At this point in time, they do. There are pictures on the internet that are authentic, that are real. I would submit to you that there are in fact pictures of the internet, on the internet, of genuine alien creatures, of genuine UFOs, but you would never know which ones are authentic, because 1 out of 100, maybe 1 out of 1,000 are authentic. They're absolutely engulfed, submerged in a bunch of disinformation, a bunch of pictures that are intentionally fake, hoaxes. So at this point in time, I keep saying this, is that the game has changed. It's no longer kill that person he knows too much, which was the way they used to do it, is get rid of him. Then it became discredit him, destroy his reputation, put him in jail, whatever. But at this point, they don't even do that. Now it's sow disinformation, distract them, put up hoaxes, make a mockery of this subject with stuff that is blatantly false. And so what we're heading towards inevitably, and this is why this conversation is so pertinent, what we are heading towards is inevitable disclosure of all of these things, because information is being shared too ubiquitously and too quickly. They can't put a lid on it forever. So what they're doing at this point in time isn't kill him, cover it up, and they're even beginning to pivot away from disinformation and misinformation. Now they know the truth is coming out. The truth is going to emerge on many fronts about many different things. Now it's all about crafting the narrative. That's what the game is about now. It's about crafting the narrative so that when these things inevitably come out, when these things fall into the realm of fact, from being fictional or mythological or just theories that whack jobs are out looking for Bigfoot, when suddenly, because it's inevitable in my opinion, a body is produced, DNA testing, which by the way, Fritz, is becoming cheaper and cheaper every day. You can get genetic testing done for $100 now. And so it is inevitable. The information age is forcing disclosure of Bigfoot, of UFOs, of all kinds of stuff. So it is the narrative that is being crafted around these things that is going to be the real dangerous element to all of this, the deception. I think that the theory of evolution, because they have the proof that the hominids exist, they have the proof that the hominids exist. It's not proof for the evolution of species. It is proof of a divergent Nephilim race that has existed on the earth since ancient times and exists on the earth to this day. These entities are not human, they're not fully human, and they let's just say they may have angelic DNA components involved in their genome. So I think that we can expect that this information is going to be leaked, purposefully leaked in the future, and controlled to support we can say to support an ancient astronaut theory, panspermia. Remember, it was Zecharia Sitchin who said that the Anunnaki came and they created the human race. How did they create the human race? They took a hominid species that was natural to this planet. In other words, a Bigfoot-type species, and they spliced the Anunnaki, their own DNA with that hominid species to create the human race. All the pieces are starting to fall into place for this narrative. And it's interesting that you point out that some of these entities have the elongated skull, because it may be that these elongated skull humanoids that are being discovered all over the earth, which I believe are also a genetic deviation from the human race, may be a component of these hominids, may be simply a more human version of these ape-like hominids. In other words, there's possibly hundreds of different varieties of these things roaming around. Some of these things are more human than non-human. Others are more non-human than human. So it's a fascinating subject, and I think it is more pertinent today than it was years ago.
Yes. And another thing that I was thinking about when I was watching your episode 2 And you may have alluded to it, but there's these megalithic underground cities, one off of Japan, one off of the west coast of India, and one off of the west coast of Cuba. You're familiar with these, right? Because I have written about them.
The underwater megalithic constructions.
Right.
Yep.
Right. Because you didn't mention those, but they have pyramids, they have large stones, and so these megalithic cities, which are very extremely ancient, which is why people are denying that they're that they exist, even though the pictures, the underwater pictures, show that they exist. But people are going, oh no, that couldn't exist because people weren't doing anything back then. We were supposedly living in caves, like a monkey, and so there's no way that there could be these complex civilizations that ancient, but those cities are further validation of what you guys are researching.
They are. In fact, we do actually feature. We mention them in passing. The multiple underground complexes, megalithic complexes that have been discovered all throughout the earth. And the point is that we see the megalithic constructions that are on the surface of the earth, and we document the fact that they're employing the same kind of technology, they're built to the same scale. But what people don't realize is that under the sea, there are multitudes of these constructions all over the earth. And the reason why it's so important to understand that is because it gives you a sense of the scale. It gives you a sense of, in fact, how ubiquitous this kind of technology was, that we're dealing with a very advanced civilization that in all probability was not fully human, a hybrid civilization. And we're dealing with the same structures, the same kind of pyramids, the same kind of megalithic scale, the same kind of cyclopean masonry that is able to construct these massive edifices without the use of mortar. This is a ubiquitous technology. Obviously, this kind of paradigm does not fit into our natural history books. It doesn't fit. There is no place for it. They have no explanation for it. And it's certainly just like the hominids, just like the fact that, listen, Fritz, if hominids are still walking around today, evolution has a problem. The proponents of the evolutionary theory have a problem, because those were supposed to have died off a long time ago in favor of us, in favor of the human race, that natural selection weeded out those traits and evolved ultimately Homo sapiens, us. So if these guys are still walking around on the earth, it does not fit into the evolutionary paradigm. That is another reason why they have a vested interest in keeping the existence of the hominids a secret. I'd like to sum all of this stuff up that we've been talking about with something that I discovered when I was in Italy, and that is, I was talking with some individuals who were involved in digging up the bones of giants. Not only giants, also cyclopses. But this one particular individual who I was talking to, who I had to meet him in on a street corner, basically on a rainy day. We had to quickly converge on his position, rendezvous with him in the street, talk to him very quickly, and then sort of melt away, because he was very nervous about being seen talking to us, and he definitely didn't want to do it in his home, and so that was the only way he was willing to meet with us, is if it was just a quick rendezvous in the street, 5-minute information dump, and then we dispersed. And so that's what we did. And this individual was involved in, as I said, digging up the bones of giants. But what's amazing is that he was digging up the bones of giants for the municipality, for the government on the island of Sardinia. And in other words, the government knew that these bones were there, and they were actively employing people to go in with them to excavate these bones, to dig them up, so that they could build whatever kind of structures they wanted to build in those areas. So I asked him, because I had heard all these stories of people who were digging bones up, eyewitness testimonies from people, interviewing all kinds of people who in Sardinia would be digging themselves for their own home projects, digging out an extra room in their basement and would come upon a skeleton 15 feet long, or a hand that was enormous. And so I asked him the obvious question that everybody wants to know all the time, and that is, who was taking the bones? Where did they go? So you dug the bones up. Where did they go? And he looked me right in the eyes and he said, without even questioning his answer. In other words, it was a definitive answer that he had already had from his experience, and that was the Vatican and the Illuminati. That's what he told me, and that was a response to, where are the bones going? Who's taking the bones? The Vatican and the Illuminati. In fact, when they would dig these bones up in Sardinia, and we are going to be featuring this in our next episode, which we're working on now. When they would dig these bones up, oftentimes it was literally the priests of the Catholic Church that were working with them. They would dig the bones up, and also working with the government. So it would be the government of Sardinia. It would be the presence of the Catholic Church via the priests, and it would be these guys that were employed by the government to do the labor, to actually use the shovels and the machinery. And they would extract the bones carefully, and they would hand them to the priests. And the priests would then, in some cases, would have all the bones laid out in their chapels, in their churches, on tables and so forth. And sometimes there would be archaeologists present as well. But then the bones would disappear. And we know that in Sardinia, the priests were telling the villagers who were routinely coming across these bones that they were demonic, not to touch them, and if they're found, they're accursed. These are accursed artifacts. If you find them, bring them to us. That was what the villagers were being instructed to do back in the 60s and 70s and even into the 80s in Sardinia. Bring the bones to us. In other words, to the priests, to the church. And sometimes the bones would be accumulated and burned or destroyed somehow or buried again in an unknown location. But many times, which is what we had verified to us on numerous occasions when talking to people in Sardinia, including this gentleman that I already referenced, who we met in the street, many times these bones were being taken along with the artifacts that were discovered with them. I mean, we're talking gold. We're talking skeletons with gold necklaces. Dinosaurs don't wear necklaces. Mastodons don't wear bracelets. Mastodons don't have human hands, human fingers, let alone solid gold rings on those fingers. So these are humanoid giant creatures, anywhere from 9 to 20 foot tall creatures, sometimes with cycloptic eyes that were being unearthed routinely in Sardinia, and we discovered that there exists a black market, let's call it a deep black market that is even more subterranean than the black market that everybody is familiar with, where for the trafficking of drugs and human trafficking and so forth. So picture below that level of black market activity, there exists another black market highway that is moving the artifacts and the bones associated with giants, with a various assortment of Nephilim kind of creatures, aliens, all this kind of stuff is being trafficked in this deep black market. And who are the recipients? The Illuminati is what they told me, and the Vatican. And what would these things be used for? Well, they're used for occult practices. they're being incorporated into ceremonies. They're being incorporated into the rites and the rituals of the occult, because these things are highly esteemed. These are the progenitors, the great race, the entities that belong to the golden age. Some of them, in some cases, and so these artifacts are highly venerated by the occult, both at the Vatican and the Illuminati at large. So I thought that was fascinating, Fritz, especially in light recently of what you told us concerning these Nephilim, living Nephilim, being present, actually present at the rituals and the ceremonies in some of these circumstances.
I have a story too that sums up things. Thank you. That everything you say is should keep everybody on the edge of their chairs. It's so fascinating. But we've talked about portals. We've talked about Nephilim. We've been talking about technology being used for an agenda for the elite. And there's a story I have too that like your account there sums up so much. I approached the elite and was requesting to be able to talk to them. They did. I was surprised that they would interact with me, but that's a long story. But basically, I came to learn, long story short, they were hoping that they could compromise me by working with me. But they were willing to answer my questions to some degree. There were some subjects, like the trauma-based mind control, they would absolutely not even talk about. But they did tell me, and I was, they said, in the future, we're going to be ruled by enlightened aliens. And so, I've heard from the horse's mouth, this is something they expect. This is not speculation. This is that's what's on the agenda. And so, Opus Dei is actively working on this agenda. How can we get the human race to accept this? Because they know that there's going to be a credibility gap there. And hopefully we can increase that credibility gap, because these are not enlightened aliens, and the Illuminati have been working with these beings for a long time, and they're part right there, like in your interview there in episode 2, where this leading Vatican exorcist is working with Satanists. This whole subject is tainted with Luciferianism and Satanism. So, 100% of when they did polls of satanic covens, 100% of them had contact with aliens. So what we're talking about here? These are not enlightened beings, people, and we're here to warn you about this agenda.
That's right, and it is exactly as you say, that the elite, the truly powerful in the earth, and the truly rich, because billionaires are nothing compared to the trillionaires that actually exist, but you'll never hear from them or see their faces in the media. These are the power players. These are the ancient bloodline families that, as you said, trace whether true or not. They believe that their bloodline extends all the way back to Nimrod and even to the Watchers of the pre-flood world. These are the very same people who are funding and propagating not only the scientific endeavors such as CERN that are trying to breach the divide between the physical and the metaphysical for an assortment of reasons, but these are also the individuals, the benefactors, who are funding and promoting and propagating the Darwinian paradigm and the theory of the evolution of species. In other words, the guys who are at the top, far above Richard Dawkins, far above all of these public intellectuals, they don't believe for a minute that the human race was spawned from the evolutionary chain going back to amoebas and coming up through primates. They don't believe that for a minute, even though they're funding the propagation of that false historical narrative. These guys are at their core Luciferian. They believe that we are that we are going to shortly receive the return of ancient gods, which they are actively working to bring about and to facilitate. That the human race, some of them believe that the human race, they believe in the panspermia theory, that the human race was seeded or created or genetically engineered by the gods. And so that's the true religion. That's the true scientific, historical beliefs of the ruling elite. And when we say the ruling elite, we're talking about people who have the evidence, who have the true documentation, who have the artifacts that the Richard Dawkins of the world are not in possession of, are not even worthy to see, because they're not initiated. They are profane, just as you and I would be considered profane to these people. We're not even worthy to know the things that they know in their minds. And so you're absolutely right. We are approaching a time, we're approaching an hour, a season on earth, an age on earth, the end of an age on the earth, in which these things are going to purposely be brought to the surface, but only in a very controlled construct, a very controlled narration that's going to come forth that is going to, in fact, bolster the religious ideals, the Luciferian principle and religion of the Luciferian elite. And so that's a great way to put a cap on this conversation, Fritz, to bring it all the way back to people like Hillary Clinton, who may be, in fact, pawns in that very game. Because I believe that the great revelation, the great disclosure is going to be orchestrated in Rome at the Vatican. And I have a strong indication that the Pope is going to, very possibly this Pope, Pope Francis, is going to be the mouthpiece that begins to bring these revelations to the surface and brings them into the public purview. So again, looping all the way back to the beginning of our conversation, we may in fact be seeing an attempted Jesuit coup in the White House to put somebody in there that will be in alignment with Pope Francis and whatever declarations he may be planning on making. So, Fritz, thank you for putting this conversation with me in the public sphere through YouTube, and for taking the time to talk with me today. And any final thoughts you have?
Oh, well, I got a lot of thoughts swimming in my head. I will mention something here that is a little bit new, but I was a missionary to bring Jehovah's Witnesses to Christ, and it was in the Kingdom Hall where I first learned about Genesis 6 and the Nephilim, because most of the Christian churches won't teach what Genesis 6 says, but the Jehovah's Witnesses do, and their founder, and they had some strange beliefs that a lot of people aren't aware of, but the Awake magazine used to be called the Golden Age, and their founder, Russell, who was from the Russell Illuminati family, he believed that we were going to go into a golden age where humans would become androgynous. And so you've got this whole subtle religious thing there that's just sitting underneath. You start scratching and you discover a lot of the things that we've been talking about. It's there. It's just people have never had it called to their attention.
That's right. It's there right below the surface of every major scientific endeavor on Earth. That right below the surface, you're going to find the benefactors are Luciferians in many cases, maybe not in every case, but certainly in the ones that are the most profound and most heavily funded. There is a Luciferian faction on this earth that is moving humanity towards a resurrection of the Golden Age and everything that implies.